Hi there, and welcome to Off the Data Provided, an interpersonal communication podcast. I'm, of course, your host, Dr. Marcus C. Shepard. On today's episode, we are going to explore how to create positive communication climates. Through our discussion and discovery, we will touch on key terms and concepts such as confirmation and disconfirmation, defensive and supporting climates, conflict and communication, as well as delve into some guidelines for creating sustaining healthy communication climates. Of course, stay tuned to the end for Ask Dr. Shepard, and if you'd like to submit your own Ask Dr. Shepard, please feel free to email me at offthedataprovided@gmail.com. Once again, that is offthedataprovided@gmail.com. So when we think about creating communication climates, we first need to think about the levels of confirmation and disconfirmation that exist in our verbal communication. So when we think about confirming messages and disconfirming messages, they have three different categories. So there's recognition, there's acknowledgement, and there's endorsement. So recognition is the expression of awareness of another person's existence. So if you're confirming messages, they're usually like you exist, hello, or disconfirming messages, you don't exist, or silence when someone appears or approaches. Then we have acknowledgement, which is, of course, attentiveness to what a person feels, thinks, or says. So examples of confirming messages are listening, saying, I'm sorry you're hurt, I know you're worried. Or on the flip side, disconfirming messages might be that you're not listening. You tell someone you'll get over it, let's drop the subject. And then lastly, of course, is endorsement. So this is accepting a person's feelings or thoughts as valid. So endorsement doesn't mean agreeing with someone's thoughts or feelings. It just means you accept them as real for that person. So I think of confirming messages such as what you think is true, what you feel is okay, I feel the same way, what you feel is normal, where disconfirming messages probably are, you're wrong, you shouldn't feel that way, your feelings don't make sense, it's stupid that you feel that way. So already, if we're thinking about the larger topic of today, creating communication climates, we can already see how using confirming messages is creating more supportive climates for you to engage in communication, engage in conflict, the really big topic that we'll discuss today. And when we're using disconfirming messages, such as you don't exist, let's drop the subject, your feelings don't make sense, you shouldn't feel how you do, for breaking it down versus recognition, acknowledgement, and endorsement, you can already see how defensive that is going to make a person and the communication climate. So it's also important, right? We're talking more so about the verbals, but non-verbally, we can also acknowledge others by nodding our heads or making eye contact to show that we're listening, where of course verbal acknowledgement are direct responses to people's communication. And so we know that when we talk about communication, it's always both verbal and non-verbal. And when I think about confirming and disconfirming messages, and we even broaden it to social media, if you're on such sites as Twitter, aka I guess X if you call it by its new name, you can see this in real time when people are having debates or spirited engagements, or maybe even conflict if you want to call it on the timeline. Depending on how they're engaging, you can be seeing confirming messages where I'm sorry I hurt your feelings, or that's not what I necessarily said, versus maybe disconfirming messages, you shouldn't feel that way, let's drop the subject, you're wrong, or just a straight block, or you're stupid. This can rile up people and continue to create more defensive climates versus those that maybe are trying to foster supportive climates. So we see this, of course, in face-to-face communication. I'm sure if you've ever disagreed with a sibling or a close friend or a romantic partner, sometimes it can spiral due to the disconfirming messages someone is giving you, as well as if you've ever been on a social network platform where you are engaging back and forth with someone. If they're more disconfirming messages, you're probably bringing up your guard, you're becoming more defensive, and that's going to foster a defensive climate, versus confirming messages that are going to foster a more supportive climate for you. And so when we think about defensive and supportive climates, we can also break them down via evaluation versus description, certainty versus provisionalism, as well as strategy versus spontaneity. So clearly, as we said, confirming messages versus disconfirming messages can set up a supportive or defensive climate, and we can evaluate these even further. So when we think about evaluation versus description, descriptive communication doesn't evaluate what others think and feel. Instead, it usually describes behaviors without passing judgment. On the flip side, descriptive language may refer to others, but it does so by describing, not evaluating their behaviors. So you're not making a judgment that something was good, something was bad. You're just describing the behavior about what happened. You're using descriptive terms, as we've talked about earlier in this podcast, being ethical and effective with our communication. When you describe something, you're giving people as much detail as possible. So literally a day before recording this podcast, a friend had reached out and sent me some text messages that she had sent to a potential romantic interest and was asking for feedback on them because she felt like she was maybe being too hard. But her language, when I looked at it, it was a bit evaluative. It wasn't super descriptive. And even the other person as well, which can potentially lead to a defensive climate and or lead to miscommunication because we're not describing what the actual issue is. I'm mad at you. Well, what does that actually mean? You hurt my feelings. These are evaluative, right? These are negative valence, but it's not giving us the core root. When you decide not to return my call after texting me that you'll call me back in an hour and I don't hear from you from 2 days, I get upset and worried that you don't care about me. That's descriptive. These are actions that happen that then explain my feelings. It's not evaluation in terms of you don't care about me, you don't like me. And we can see that flip of the script a little bit. So in the descriptive, you're outlining explicitly how you feel and why you feel that. In evaluation, you're assigning a judgment to that person off of their actions. And so if I tell someone that they are some type of way and they're not, you can just think about how you're going to be on guard. You're going to want to protect yourself. You're going to want to defend your character. And so instead of addressing the root issue of me not responding back to you in a timely manner in which I say, now I'm defending myself as a whole person. I'm not a bad person. What are you talking about? I do X, Y, and Z for you. And so now we're talking around things instead of talking about the actual issue or conflict. And I'm sure if you can think about your own life, there have probably been times where you're trying to address a specific action with somebody, but it snowballs or explodes into something else, probably because you're using maybe more evaluative language than descriptive language. Then when it comes to certainty versus provisionalism, we know that certainty suggests that there's only one answer, valid point of view, or course of action. Because certainty proclaims an absolute correct position, it slams the door on any future discussion, communicated when we repeat our position instead of considering others' ideas. So when I think about certainty, if I'm upset because of our lack of consistent communication, and so I've made an evaluative judgment on you that you don't care about me, you're not that interested in me, instead of just describing, we talk and we have great text conversations, but then I don't hear from you for 3 or 4 days, and that doesn't make me feel as if you value me as a person, is different than saying you're bad at communication. If we take that a step further then and we think about certainty, if I say the only way to fix this is for you to talk to me every single day, well, I'm sure there are other ways to address that. There's no single right way to address consistency, and maybe talking every single day isn't what this person is looking for this early on in getting into a potential romantic relationship or even a platonic friendship. So that's an issue. Meanwhile, provisionalism relies on tentative language to signal openness to other points of view. Provisional language indicates that we're willing to consider alternative positions, and this encourages others to voice their ideas. We also know that provisional language lessens the chances that others will feel they have lost face in interaction. So, coming back to the lack of communication, not hearing from you maybe 3 or even 5 days, and I'm bringing this to your attention, with the problem solving and professionalism, I'm open to hearing why is it that we have such great text conversations and then you fall off? Is it because there are other things going on in your life? Is it because maybe you're not a texting person? You're more of a face-to-face person. You're more of a phone person. If I use certainty and assign the way that we have to fix this issue, or assign this is the only point of view, that you don't care about me because we talk and then you go ghost in a sense for a few days and then you orbit back around and hit me back up. If I'm using my certainty, then we are going to not solve this issue. You're going to be defensive. You're going to be defending your character against this proclamation. And then, of course, strategy versus spontaneity. So strategic communication sometimes can aim to manipulate a person or group for the benefit of the person manipulating. So if I want to talk to you more frequently, I might strategize on how to talk to you so I can get that outcome. Where spontaneity stands in stark contrast to strategy. Spontaneity and communication is more open, honest, and not manipulative. So I can maybe present my point of view and how I would like to talk to you more frequently, but I don't have to then say that this is how it has to be, right? That certainty of that strategy with my evaluative language. We can see how this is going to create someone to be defensive in your engagement, especially with conflict, where if I'm using descriptive language, this is how I feel because of these actions. I'm not assigning an evaluative judgment, but these actions make me feel this way. I'm owning my feelings. Provisionalism, being open to there being multiple viewpoints, there being multiple positions, there being multiple ways to solve this problem. Spontaneity, also more positively, being open, honest, and trying not to manipulate. Hearing your side, hearing your point of view, figuring out how we can solve this issue. And also when it comes to defensive and supportive climates, we have control versus problem solving, neutrality versus empathy, and superiority versus equality. So we can also tell control, neutrality, and superiority are going to probably foster more defensive communication climates, where problem orientation, empathy, and equality are going to foster more supportive communication climates. So controlling communication attempts to coerce others. So rather than imposing a preference, though, problem-oriented communication focuses on resolving the tensions of the problems. So problem-oriented communication tends to reduce conflict and foster an interactive climate. And that interactive climate will help you, right, fix what the issue is. So if I'm trying to be controlling, I'm attempting to coerce you to do exactly what I want. So going back to the fact that we text, we have deep, meaningful text conversations, and then the conversation ends as they do in texting. Maybe you said what you need to say. I said what I need to say. It was getting late. We ended. I thought you were going to hit me. A day goes by, 2 days go by, and maybe I send a funny meme. I don't hear from you. 3 days goes by, 4 days, and then 5 days you pop up. And I'm like, okay, this is what we have to do. If you want to stay in my life, this is what you have to. Ooh, controlling. I barely know you. I'm not that invested in this relationship. I'm probably going to remove myself from this situation. Versus problem orientation. This is the problem. I want to talk to you with more frequency. I want to talk to you with more consistency. Let's define what consistency looks like through descriptive language, through provisionalism, figuring out that there are multiple points of view on what consistency could be, and be more spontaneous with our communication potentially. Or spontaneous with how we're approaching this. I don't have a clear-cut way to fix this. This is what I would like. This is the end goal. How do you think we can get there? That's problem orientation. When we move to empathy and neutrality, right, we tend to become defensive when others act in a neutral manner, especially if we're talking about something we feel strongly about. So neutral communication often implies indifference to others and what they say. So consequently, others may feel hurt or defensive. On the flip side, empathy confirms the worth that has been shown to the other person for their thoughts and their feelings. So if you're telling me your issue with me or your issue with somebody else and I'm acting very neutral, I'm not engaging, I'm not supporting you, we're probably going to have an issue. You probably think I'm disinterested. You probably think I don't think this is such a big deal. Where empathy, I've been through that sort of thing. I can understand where you're coming from. I dealt with something similar in another friendship. I would never want you to feel that way. Or this happened in a relationship of a friend of mine, right? You're empathizing. You're engaging with the person. You're showing them that you understand, that you care about them. That's going to foster a more supportive climate to engage and move past the conflict. And then lastly, superiority versus equality. If I'm looking down on you, right, I'm better than you. Oh, well, this is the reason why you don't have a lot of friends, or this is the reason why you never date people so long, because you're not consistent with your communication. Ooh, okay. Who's going to want to stay around or try and foster or work through this issue when someone's talking down on them like that? Probably not a lot of people, and I would hope nobody, but we do know that people get stuck in negative communication climates that continually have them on the defense. Versus the superiority, or superiority versus the equality, right? Equality, I've been there. I understand. We all make mistakes. It's okay. I've been a bad friend before. I haven't been the best potential romantic partner to somebody. You're leveling the playing field. You're helping them save face as well, because they don't feel like they're out there all alone. And so this all lines up with, of course, the big buzzword for the day, which is conflict, which is inherent in any communication climate and any interpersonal relationship. So conflict usually exists when people who depend on each other have different views, interests, values, responsibilities, or objectives, and perceive their differences as incompatible. So typically, conflict is a sign that people are involved with each other. That is going to be really important for us to tease out. You're not going to have conflict with people who you are not intertwined or involved with. Perfect example. I still wear a face mask. I still take COVID seriously. We are still in a pandemic, as I stress in almost every episode, because it is important to still talk about. And so I have been accosted multiple times on the street by people questioning why I'm wearing a mask or telling me my mask doesn't work. Knock on wood, if you can hear that. I have not gotten COVID as of yet, to my knowledge. I test myself. I'm fortunate enough to test weekly. So when these people come up to me on the street or say things while I'm walking by, it's not really a conflict because I'm not involved with these people. I just brush it off. I might say something. I might totally ignore them. I just keep it moving because we're not involved. So if they weren't differences, they wouldn't matter and they wouldn't need to be resolved. So I don't have these huge differences with these people because I'm not dependent upon them. They're not part of my life. And so when it comes to conflict, we know that conflict can be overt or covert. So overt conflict exists when people express differences in a straightforward manner. They bring it directly to your attention. Hey, Jamal, I don't like when you tell Sarita my business. Overt. I'm bringing it straight to you, straight no chasers, we say. Now let's resolve what it is. Or we have covert conflict, which exists when people express disagreements or differences only indirectly. Maybe you're trying to figure out where to go to eat with a friend, and they suggest a certain restaurant, and you say, I don't know about that. The last restaurant you picked wasn't great, and I don't want to waste my money. Well, that's a little covert. Instead of just spelling it out, hey, I don't think you have the best taste in restaurants. The last few restaurants we've been to that you suggested haven't been great, and I don't want to waste my money on a mediocre meal. That's going to be more overt than saying something a little slick like that. So when we break down conflict, we know that conflict orientation are usually our attitudes towards the conflict. And the three attitudes that we have are lose-lose, win-lose, and win-win. So sometimes when it comes to conflict, people approach it as a lose-lose, which means that the result of the conflict is going to be a loss for everyone. So perfect example, where we want to eat. Maybe I want to eat pizza and you want Chinese. Well, we're going to compromise, so we're both going to lose out on what we want, and we end up getting Thai. It's lose-lose. You really want Chinese, I want a pizza, we both lost. If we continually view conflict as a lose-lose, the more times that we have conflict with someone, and we know from different research that what we actually remember about conflict isn't what the actual conflict is, but how it made us feel in the end. So if I continually feel like I lose whenever it comes to conflict, I'm going to be less engaged in this relationship, and this relationship probably isn't going to last long term. Then we have win-lose. So this is an orientation to conflict that assumes that one person wins at the expense of another. So I want pizza, you want Chinese, one of us is going to have to bend the knee. And whoever wins is going to feel great, and whoever loses is going to begrudgingly eat what it is. Of course, if you're on that losing side again, you're going to continue to not value that relationship as highly. On the flip side, if it's more balanced in this win-loss, it might be a rocky relationship, but it's one where maybe you think about how, okay, we don't always agree, we don't always get our own ways, but sometimes I win, sometimes that person wins. It might be a relationship that you fight to stay in. And then we have win-win. So this views conflict as it's not necessarily a lose-lose, right? We're both going to lose, or one person loses and one person gains, but we view conflict as an interaction with all parties can win. And the goal is to come with a resolution that is acceptable for everyone. So with this is more positive. So our disagreement about where to eat, clearly this is a small disagreement, I would argue, but still one nonetheless. It happens with a lot of interpersonal relationships. I want pizza, you want Chinese, and maybe we settle on Thai, but guess what? We have the meal at the Thai place, and it's one of the best meals we've had. We create great memories, and we say, you know what? I really did want pizza, and you say you want Chinese, but you know what? This was better. And so through that compromise, it's not a dirty word. We actually created or we brainstormed a better solution. And so the same can be said about my earlier issue that I keep referencing of the inconsistent communication. Because that is a conflict, I think, that a lot of interpersonal relationships encounter, especially in this day and age where we're all being worked to the bone and have less and less time to foster and maintain interpersonal relationships. So if we've created a supportive climate where we have used our descriptive language to assess what the problem is, we are using our provisionalism where we're open to multiple points of view, we're being spontaneous and being open and honest, we're being problem-oriented, trying to address the problem and figure out what solutions there are, we're being empathetic, understanding the difficult nature that people are in, and we are looking at each other as equals, we might be able to figure out a way that is more consistent. So clearly maybe we're both busy, we accept that 72 hours is too long to go without talking to one another, so we try and cap it at 48. And if it's reached that 48 mark and someone hasn't responded, then the other person will maybe cold call that person. That might be the solution that we come up with that feels like a win-win. So the person that's wanting more communication is clearly not getting it maybe as frequently as he, she, or they want. And the person that's maybe not the best on communication is getting a little leeway, but they're not having as much leeway. So you might look at it as lose-lose, right? Well, I'm giving up the fact that I want to talk to you every day, and this person is giving up maybe the freedom of their communication, but it's not as bad. Or I would maybe flip the orientation. It's clear I'm going to talk to this person with more consistency now. We're going to be more intentional with our communication. And this person stepping up to the plate to do that, who hasn't been as great, is a sign that they're interested and invested in me, versus also the other person where, hey, you know, I'm understanding that how I communicate or my freedom or my flexibility maybe isn't as available that that person has. So you're both winning while giving up something, but you're both winning at the fact that there will be more consistency that you both ultimately desire or hopefully desire. And lastly, when it comes to the conflict response, we talked about the lose-lose, win-lose, and win-win. Sometimes when we have conflict, people respond in 4 ways. So there's exit response, neglect response, loyalty response, and voice. So exit response involves leaving a relationship either by walking out or by psychologically withdrawing. So clearly if you're in the early phases of, let's say, dating or fostering a new friendship, if there's a conflict involved with seeing each other with more frequency or communicating with each other more frequent and you're just not interested or unwilling or unable, you might just exit. You're not as invested in this relationship, so it falls by the wayside. I think a lot of dating apps and websites, This is the exit response that people kind of get with inconsistency. They'll just unmatch you after a few days. I know I'm famous for encouraging my friends, if they're engaging with someone and they want to consistently keep it, that there should be a cap on how long you stay on the app. So you move it to planning a date and or meeting in the real world for coffee or something. And also, if they match with someone and they send them a message and the person hasn't responded at all within 72 hours, you probably should just unmatch. If you are on the app looking for a committed romantic relationship or a serious dating experience. So if that conflict arises where, hey, you've been talking to them and then they fall off the face of the earth and it's been 7 days, you might just exit. You're going to walk away by removing them from your selection. We also have the neglect response. So this occurs when a person denies or minimizes the problem. So you're making a mountain out of a molehill. You're really complaining about inconsistency. It's only been 3 days. It's only been 5 days. Like, I've just had a busy week. Like, get over it. Stuff happens. Life happens. We barely know each other. Okay, well, you're trying to get to know this person better. If you're going to talk to them once every 5 days, is that really going to be able to foster a stronger interpersonal relationship? Probably not. We also have the loyalty response. So this is staying committed to a relationship despite differences. So loyalty involves hoping that things will get better on their own. Loyalty is usually a silent allegiance. So it's passive. You kind of just think, oh, we'll just get over this rut. It's okay. These things naturally happen. But you're not actually engaging in the conflict and resolving it. You just hope that it will get better. So with the lack of consistency, maybe you say, you know what, people have a lot of lives. Maybe the person isn't on this app as much, so it's okay. Hopefully it'll get better. And then you're still on the app 3 months later and you guys are sending each other messages once a week. I don't think that's great. And then we have voice, which focuses on dealing directly with the problems and helps the relationship by managing differences. So clearly in long-term committed romantic relationships, long-term friendships, familial relationships, ideally, when there's an issue, you address it head on. You are crafting ideally a supportive climate, though we're all not the best communicators. So sometimes we might mix in some of those aspects of a defensive climate. But if we can recognize that in the moment when the communication starts to turn, hopefully you take a step back and say, hey, wait a minute, I think we're getting off track. This is the issue. We've delved into other things that may also be issues, but also might just be personal attacks that have nothing to do with this issue. So voice, of course, is the best conflict response. Exit response is ideally not you're withdrawing either physically and or psychologically. Neglect response, you're minimizing what someone thinks. A loyalty response, you don't say anything at all and just helps it gets better on your own. And so that final component of conflict is the outcome. As I've said before, when most people think of conflict outcomes, they think of the decisions that resulted. So as I teased before, but super important to underscore, a conflict's impact on a relationship may be more significant and enduring than the outcome, than the actual decision. Let me say that again. A conflict's impact on a relationship may be more significant and enduring than the actual decision. So relationship outcomes are influenced more by how we manage conflict than by the resolution itself. And perfect example of this is one of my best friends. Think of her as my sister Kira and I. We get into conflict dust-ups every now and then, and she rarely, if ever, remembers what the actual conflict is about because we focus on our conflict response's voice and we try our best to use supportive tactics to create a positive, supportive communication climate where we can resolve it. And so usually if we have an issue with one another, we don't let more than a day or two pass before head-on addressing it, and we talk it through, we figure it out, we commit to doing better, we're not evaluative, we are more descriptive in our language, we're open to different viewpoints, we're open to different ways of solving the problem, different ways to look at it. We don't come at each other as if one is better than the other. We're aware that we're human. Part of our humanity is we make mistakes, even if we are attempting to do our best, and we work through that. Of course, if you're with someone who is conflict avoidant, who's going to use the neglect, the loyalty, or the exit response, you're probably going to slowly but surely have a negative engagement or view of conflict. And so when we are thinking about those guidelines for creating, sustaining healthy communication climates, we first and foremost want to communicate in ways that confirm others. So you confirm yourself when you express your thoughts and your feelings honestly. By doing that, you show that you respect yourself. So you also give others a chance to understand who you are. So talk in that I versus you language. I feel like this when you do these things. That is a great way to make sure you're talking in descriptive terms instead of evaluative terms. You do this, you do that, you hurt my feelings. Well, that's probably not their intent, but as we know, intent doesn't negate the outcome of those actions. So when you talk through using you language that confirms who you are and how you feel, it allows that person to respond to those claims and not be defensive. We also know that we should communicate in ways that confirm ourselves through looking at differences of aggressive communication, assertive communication, and differential communication. So aggressive communication occurs when one person puts him, her, or their self in front of another's thoughts, feelings, goals, or actions. So I might say, I demand that we spend time together. That's an aggressive way to say that I want to hang out with you. Assertive communication occurs when you don't subordinate your own feelings for others and you don't put your feelings above others. So this is kind of the perfect way to do it. So I'd like to create more time for us is a really easy, assertive way to say you want to see somebody again. And then deferential communication occurs when you put someone else's feelings ahead of your own thoughts, feelings, goals, or actions. So wanting to spend time with someone, the deferential way might say, if you don't want us to spend time with each other, that's okay with me. But I'd like to still see you if that's okay. You're putting their feelings ahead of your own. You're softening the blunt. You're not being assertive with what exactly you want. I'd like to see you again. If you're interested, when would you be free? That's more assertive. You're telling someone what you want. You're opening the door for them to say they're not interested or not free. Where aggressive would be, I demand we spend time together. I'm going to pick you up at 8 p.m. tomorrow. Woo, okay, that's a little harsh. Also, another example might be you're trying to talk to someone about their feelings. Being aggressive, you might say, tell me what you're feeling. I insist. Ooh, okay. Assertive, I'd like to understand more how you feel. And differential, if you don't want to talk about how you feel, that's okay. So we can tell just from these different aspects, these two examples, that being aggressive is going to make someone become defensive. It's going to be more off-putting. Being assertive, that sweet middle spot, is going to be a great way to make sure your feelings are known, or your thoughts, or your goals, or your actions are known, but also open to someone else's thoughts, feelings, goals, or actions. And then deferential is kind of putting their feelings, thoughts, goals, and actions ahead of your own and saying that yours don't really matter when they do matter. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we show grace. So we grant forgiveness. We're putting aside our needs or helping save face for others when we clearly know that this world is super hard. It's super difficult. And with showing grace, you might also think about timing conflict effectively. So you might time how long you can talk about it. You might be flexible about when you engage with conflict. So some people prefer to tackle the problem as soon as it comes up, where others may need time to reflect on that. And you might use this time conflict aspect or concept such as bracketing, where we mark off or bracket peripheral issues for later discussion. So if it comes back to that consistency, maybe part of the consistency issue is the depth of communication. Well, that might be issue for later discussion, or the times in which you communicate with me. So you're hitting me up right before I go to bed. I'm probably not going to be as present and able to communicate with you effectively. So that is our lesson on creating communication climates. We talked over different levels of confirmation and confirmation when it comes to messages. We talked about how there is recognition, acknowledgement, and endorsement, and how that can show up both verbally and non-verbally. We broke down defensive and supportive climates via these different binaries, such as evaluation versus ascription, certainty versus provisionalism, strategy versus spontaneity. We also talked about control versus problem orientation when it comes to those defensive and supportive communication climates. We talked about neutrality versus empathy, as well as superiority versus equality as well when it comes to defensive and supportive climates. We then talked about how conflict orientation can be lose-lose, win-lose, win-win, and how depending on how you actually solve the conflict is going to matter more than the actual decisions. So if you use those conflict responses such as exit, where you walk away or you withdraw psychologically, neglect where you minimize the problem, or loyalty where you don't say anything, it's probably going to have a negative outcome on your relationship. And every time you get into conflict, you're going to regret being in this relationship and maybe start to pull back slowly but surely. We talk about how voice is the ideal conflict response, where you focus directly on the problem and help the relationship by managing these differences. And then we talked lastly about guidelines for creating and sustaining healthy communication. So we want to make sure we communicate in ways that confirm others as well as confirm ourselves by using that IU language, but also figuring out the difference between aggressive, more so putting your feelings above others, assertive, putting your feelings and others on an equal playing field, or deferential, putting someone else's feelings above your own. And then lastly, showing grace to others, being forgiving, putting our needs aside at times to understand that things happen, and then using time effectively, so potentially bracketing off peripheral issues to discuss later, as well as being more flexible about how people like to engage with conflict. So that was conflict and communication climate in a nutshell. And now we will move on into our Ask Dr. Shepard. So this Ask Dr. Shepard from this week comes from Daniel, and Daniel says, "Hi, Dr. Shepard. I recently moved to Atlanta and I'm having a really difficult time getting to know people. I know in an earlier episode you talked to somebody who moved to Chicago and gave them some advice. I've been trying to get out there. I've been trying to go to different things I see on social media, but I'm still not connecting with people. Can you please help me figure out a way to make friends?" So thank you so much for this. I think it is difficult to make friends in adulthood. A lot of people, there's the economic issue or aspect where a lot of people just aren't going out as much anymore because money is tighter and tighter. I know I saw a recent news article that literally reported that the US dollar has basically dropped by about 25% in the last 5 years. So $100,000 would get you what $125,000 would get you this year, back in 2020. That was kind of the big tagline. So clearly money is tighter, so people aren't going out. Usually going out is a great way to meet people. Also, as you get older, you kind of get locked in with your core group of friends. And even if they don't live in your city, you might spend your weekends on the phone, FaceTime, traveling to see people. You might just be in the house or become more of a homebody as life progresses. So these can be different obstacles, but what I would say, and what I believe I told the person who moved to Chicago as well, is use social media and use these apps to hopefully make connections and find people. Make it very clear, especially on these dating apps, that you're really using them just to look for friends. You're not here for a romantic interest. It's just friends. Here are my interests. These are the things I like to do. So right, if you have those similar interests, or I guess Hinge, whatever, is it a swipe as well on Hinge? I don't know. But whatever it is, the positive on these aspects, liking, checking, whatever it is, do that, make it very clear, and that can be a great way. Also, if you're active on a social media platform and you have some followers, you might say that you've recently moved to this area and you'd love to maybe meet some people who live in the area as well and start connecting with them, moving those conversations into your direct messages, figuring out if you enjoy the vibe, exchange maybe phone numbers or a different social media platform. Maybe you can video chat if you want to feel more comfortable not giving your actual number out, and see how those relationships maybe evolve. As I've shared before, two of my closest friends I met on Twitter, and we have been thick as thieves. One of them almost a decade now, and the other coming on 8 years, I believe. So you can find people on social media, you can find people on dating apps just to be platonic, and I believe also some of these apps have also moved to being more platonic. Also, another great way to meet people is potentially just volunteering. When you volunteer, it's usually people, sometimes they come and volunteer with other friends, and you can meet bigger friend groups. And after volunteering or doing some type of activity like that, if you join a run club, usually there's a social component afterwards, or everyone might hang out somewhere to grab a drink or grab something to eat, or just to decompress and unwind. And this is where you can maybe exchange information and get to know someone better. So that would be my suggestion. As always, if you have an Ask Dr. Shepard, feel free to submit it at offthedataprovided@gmail.com, and I will see you all on the next one. Have a good one.